Good afternoon, and I know that I'm the one standing between you and beer. Yeah? That makes this a very fast presentation. So let's get started. For a long time, we had this notion that security was not everybody's responsibility. Yeah, you had a security team in your organization who, for some reason, sprinkled some magic over your applications, and they became secure. That's a world that is long gone. And so I want to talk to you today about, certainly if you think about modern software development, how we should be integrating security and security notions into each and every step of modern development. So if you build your business, and whether you're a large enterprise or whether you're like Amazon, or a young startup, what should be your #1 priority? Protecting your customers. Yeah? And #2 should be protecting your business. Without this protection, you do not have a business. Look at all the threats that we've seen in the past years, the recent years. And whether those are credit cards being stolen, PII information being stolen, denial of service attacks all over the place. You have to protect your customers, otherwise you do not have a business. Now I know that if you're a young business and you're starting up and you're building an application that nobody else has built before, it's hard to start thinking on day one, how can I protect my customers? But you need to. And I know that in the past we've always seen security as sort of an added tax to the things that we need to do. You need to change your mind. Protecting your customers should come first, before you start thinking about your application. Because if you do not protect your customers, you do not have a business. And it might seem that at this moment, when you're a young business and you're starting up, you say, yeah, but I have no real valuable information on my customers. Believe me, 6 months down the road, or maybe 2 years down the road, when you're a very successful startup, you suddenly hold a lot of valuable information about your customers that others may won't have access to. And whether those are state-based actors, or whether it's competition, or whether it's just criminals, all of them will be after the data of your customers. So you have to make it priority #1, to protect your customers. The hard thing is, there is no line in the sand that says, this is good enough. The bad guys hire more PhDs, buy complete ISPs, pay much better salaries. Their software just needs to work for 5 minutes. They have all the advantages. And it is also that just getting a stamp of ISO 27001 or being GDPR compliant suddenly will keep the hackers out. No, it won't. It is something that you will have to be continuously aware of. And there is a development part to it, and there's an operational part to it. And this is something you cannot stop. It's not like, okay, now we implemented the right procedures, we can throw our hands back. Right? Especially because today we do development very differently than we did, let's say, 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Maybe the development process was working for 3 months on something and then you did a release. Now we do 40 or 100 releases a day. How can you be sure that of those 100 releases that you do a day, that you haven't introduced any new vulnerabilities? This is a heavy responsibility that comes with doing continuous integration and continuous development. I want to make sure that you understand that security is no longer the job of the guys on the security team or the girls on the security team. It is everybody's job. Everybody now needs to be aware of security and the potential for introducing vulnerabilities and how to manage all of these processes around it. And it is something that you have to work together with all the other people on the team. This used to be the way how a security team would look like. They would be a separate team sitting somewhere else. That is your nemesis, because everybody hates the security team, because they're in the way of your delivery schedule and things like that. But it was their responsibility to keep everything secure. That's gone. Yeah? You as developers and as architects are equally responsible for security as that the security team is. The security team should be your partners in all of this, especially when you do modern development, such as continuous integration and development. Because the times when this happened, yeah, when the security team just came in and sprinkled some magic over your applications, and suddenly they were secure, is absolutely no longer the case. By the way, they never did this. But that was the process that there was, that you thought, like, they come in, and then everything is okay after that. It's also that old-style security tools and mechanisms absolutely no longer work. If moats around our cities would be if firewalls would be the best way to protect ourselves, we would still have moats around our cities. We don't. You protect individual houses or individual building blocks within your houses. Yeah, if we do that ourselves in real life, why should we take a very different approach in our digital systems? Yeah, this whole notion of firewalls has shown, especially if you look at overall the documentation of the Snowdens and all of this world, you see that none of that has to do with a brute force attack through the front door. All attacks happen through social engineering. Yeah? Someone sends you an email, someone inside your firewall gets this email that says, this is your new retirement package, click here. And believe me, there's always an idiot that does this. Yeah? Clicks, evil JavaScript gets downloaded, tunnel gets established, and if then not the individual pieces within your systems are protected, you're toast. And we've seen this over and over and over again in the past, let's say, 3-4 years, very publicly. You have some of the large US retailers that lost literally millions of credit cards. We're bringing systems online that were never intended to be brought online. That suddenly we're hooking up customer service terminals in the stores to systems that were believed they were living behind a firewall. And so this whole notion that there is something else that takes care of your responsibility for security is a major vulnerability. Now, in all of this, I like to believe that the thing that we need to focus most on, and there's tons of things that we can talk about security. I want to talk about one particular piece of it, and that is around automation. Yeah, because actually, as humans, we're not really that great in sort of keeping track, especially when changes go really rapidly. And we may slack off a little bit, or we may have other priorities. Security needs to be largely automated. Yeah, so we talked a bit about the why and whose responsibilities. So where? Yeah, so most importantly, I think with modern development, when you do continuous integration and continuous development, you need to work on 3 parts of your pipeline. Yeah? It needs to be the security of the pipeline itself. How do you get access roles and things like that? Who is allowed to execute which of the building blocks? And then security in the pipeline. Really have automated artifact validation and static code analysis executed automatically as part of the development process. Yeah, so if this used to be sort of your CI/CD environment, this is what you need to add in all of these spaces. Yeah, you need to be logging for auditing. You need to make sure that you have continuous scans. You need to make sure that you do not introduce new libraries. And all of these things you need to do in an automated fashion. Good thing is, we can help you with most of those. Yeah, there's tools available, both in open source and as well as from cloud providers such as Amazon, that can actually automate large of these pieces for you. But you do need to do it. Yeah? For example, in the cloud world, we live with what we call a shared responsibility model. There's a lot of things that AWS does for you. Yeah, both an operational level as well as a tools level, but you still need to use the tools. Now, we're building more and more new tools to help you automate these things and to help you sort of keep continuous track of potential vulnerabilities in your world, but you still need to do it. And so there's a third part to all of this, and there's a lot of been talk about all of that stuff already. It's really about sort of, do infrastructure as code, meaning that instead of sort of automatically just fire up a bunch of servers. You need to have layouts, descriptive layouts, or declarative sort of processes that describe exactly how your infrastructure is going to look like. So that if you make changes to it, you can actually analyze those changes. So when do you do this? Always. Yeah? You need to do it both when you actually are sort of before you do a push for your code and actually go through all of this. And you need to do it actually after that you've pushed. Before pushes, you actually make them, sort of make sure that you analyze it. And after the pushes, you need to do this as well. And all of this, you need to do automatic, say, scanning of your code, automatic injection of, let's say, failures and things like that to be able to do this. And then lots of trigger stuff and things like around it. Now, how do, let's say, modern environments like the cloud world help you with this automation? And so there's so many different security tools in AWS that we can talk about. I'm only going to talk about the ones that help you with automating your security processes. Yeah? So these are just 6 of them. And they all deal with actually inspecting your environment and then giving you advice, or giving you triggers, or giving you alarms, such that you can actually take action in your automated process. So the first one of that is a pretty standard one. It's called AWS Stress Advisor. You can run it on your environment, and you get a whole bunch of advice. Not just on security, you'll get it on reliability, whether or not you're using AZs, you get advice around fault tolerance, you get advice around cost, all of these kind of things. But some part of that is indeed security. This mostly deals with sort of the static security setup, like security groups, ports that are open, things like that. AWS Config is a service that you use where you describe exactly the rules for your organization. For example, if I start a virtual machine and I attach a virtual disk to it, that virtual disk should always be encrypted. And that if that is not happening, if that disk is not encrypted, it should fail. So what you then get is sort of an environment where all the changes that you're making to your infrastructure are automatically recognized, and the rules that you set yourself are either executed or give alarms so that you can take immediate action. Inspector is a very interesting tool. You can run this on your application environment, and it will test it against a whole set of known vulnerabilities. And it is especially useful if you run a continuous development, a continuous integration world, for example, where you need to be either SOX compliant or you need to be PCI compliant, and you really want to make sure that with every code push or every application update, which may be many times a day, you are still in compliance with what you needed to do. So Inspector will automatically sort of look for your environment and give you indications about where you may be introducing potential vulnerabilities. CloudTrail is a tool that allows you, or tool, if you enable it, it will log everything. Every access to every object, to every API call. With CloudTrail, you're able to get all the information that you need to provide with your auditors or those who are interested in actually security evaluation. The cool thing is these are just log files, so you can put alarms on them. You can do log file processing in real time. And if certain patterns arise, like this particular person with this particular type of, let's say from this location, is not allowed to access objects over there, you can actually find that out through these log files. Machine learning increasingly plays an important role. We built a tool called Amazon Macy, which will scan for your data and actually tries to identify vulnerabilities or sensitive information that lives in your data that you have not protected in the right way. Why is this important? Because I believe that you, even if you're a young business, you should have a classification scheme for the data of what you're collecting of your customers. But if you're a very fast-moving startup, you do not always take the time to actually sit down and actually write all these things down and make sort of the classifications clear. This tool will help you discover information in your data that you're collecting and make sure that you get warned about, let's say, sensitive information that you're actually collecting. Yeah, so this data can get collected in real time. And there's two parts to this. On one hand, figuring out what is the kind of data that you are storing and reporting to you on that, and especially changes in that particular data, but also warning you about particular user data access. And so using machine learning, let's say with all sorts of data that we've collected over time and patterns that we've seen, or patterns that we see in your particular world, and then notifying you of new patterns that are arriving that you may not be aware of. And it's very hard because every customer is different and you cannot make easy sort of globalized pattern indications. So take, for example, this might be sort of the normal access pattern for particular data, and then suddenly you see a spike, which most likely is has access to particular sensitive data. That's most likely sort of a recognition or an investigation by a hacker or by a competitor that will actually after that will try to go after that particular data. So we use machine learning there to actually then sort of find the patterns that are normal for your users and then look for abnormal patterns that we can notify you about. And the same goes for the type of data that you have. And basically, you can find all sorts of content around PII code and credentials, all these kind of things that you may have accidentally stored in your data and that may or may not be available for people on the outside to use. So machine learning plays an important role here in sort of automatic classification of data that you then can use into your security processes. I don't know if you guys know this quote. And especially for someone like me, I only would dance if nobody would be watching. But there is something that comes with this. That is, you should dance like nobody's watching, but you should encrypt as if everybody is. Encryption is the most important tool you have in preventing unauthorized access to your data. You should encrypt everything. Always. And maybe 5 years ago, that was still too hard. I think these days, it is a lot easier, and we give you all the tools to actually manage your keys and be able to encrypt your data, both in transit as well as in rest. So encrypt your data all the time, because that's the way that you can be sure that you're the only one who has access to your data. So encrypt in transit, which is something we all already do. TLS, HTTPS, but you still have to do it. That then hits all the storage engines over there, so you get your data in there encrypted. And then at rest, make sure that all of this is encrypted as well. And you can do that in two ways. You can bring your own keys, or you can have us generate your keys for you. And then make sure who can have access to your keys to actually do these operations. And we make remember that IAM roles can be used by software as well as by individuals. So make sure that you really make sure who can have access to this data. We made it easier for you. We actually built a new library, it's an open source library for TLS implementation. If you look at libSSL, I think that's a few million lines of code with lots of vulnerabilities in it. We built a much smaller one which has only 6,000 lines of code by basically stripping away all the esoteric options that there were in SSL. And so all of Amazon S3, for example, now uses S2N, signal-to-noise library, to have a very lightweight TLS implementation that we have formally verified. Make use of the certificate manager. We give you certificates for free. And we manage them for you for free. Please use it then. And in all of this, you can bring your own keys, which is really important. So if you just are interested in encryption at rest, but you don't care whether Amazon actually has access to the keys. You can have us generate the key for you. But if you really are concerned about any unauthorized access to your keys, make sure that you bring your own keys. And you can use CloudTrail in all of this to know exactly who operated with what key under what conditions. So encrypt always. One particular other threat, I think, these days, where everybody's worried about, is distributed denial of service attacks. If you look at what kind of attacks there are, quite a few of our, what I would call volumetric attacks, there's basically flooding the pipe, sending out huge amounts of UDP or ICMP messages to just consume all the resources there are. Then there's a particular set of them that I would call state exhaustion attacks. State exhaustion attacks work at, let's say, the TCP state machine. That's the TCP SYN attack is one of those examples. And then there is a particular category that is really the level 7 attacks that are up at level 7, that basically at application level attacks. Those are the hardest ones because, for example, for us to detect those, we don't know whether you've just become really popular or whether you are engaged, subject to a DDoS attack. This is sort of the typical distribution of these kind of attacks. Yeah, the majority are still volumetric attacks. So the application level attacks only are a relatively small subset of them. The cool thing is that we give you AWS Shield, which protects you, all of you, from DDoS attacks at both volumetric attacks as well as state exhaustion attacks. So those are things that you don't have to worry about if you run in AWS. And for the level 7 attacks, we have something called Web Application Firewall. That is not a firewall around everything, it's just around one application, where you can push data back, which gives you sort of level 7 protection to the edge, and where we will block data for you, block access to your applications at the edge. Yeah, so this used to be a sort of architectural diagram, I think, that we put up 8 years ago, something like that, because we helped someone build an app that really had to scale well. That's not the correct architectural diagram anymore. Yeah? This needs to look like this. Yeah? If you really want to make sure that you build an app that can serve millions of users, you have to take as step number 1 to protect your customers. Yeah? So all of these pieces you need to make use of, and all of them help you automate the operations of your environment to make sure that you can protect your customers. So let's come back. What's really important? Yeah? Protect your customers and your business. That should always be priority number 1. Do as much of that as you can for automation, and use the tools that automate many of these processes by automatically inspecting your data, by automatically inspecting your environment, by continuously inspecting your continuous integration pipeline. Encrypt everything. Always. I'll make the slide set available. There's a bunch of open source tools and examples available around the whole continuous integration and continuous security environment that you guys can learn from if you're interested in that. In the hall next door, let me just pitch this for one moment. They're the AWS guys. If you want to learn more about security on AWS, go talk to them. There's lots of developer workshops. They're really packed. There's mentoring sessions. Activate, which actually helps you sort of build your startup on AWS. Go check them out if you want to. Yeah, so I believe there has never been a better time to build secure applications. So with that, go build. Thank you.